Hi everyone, you're listening to the Bridgeway podcast. The purpose of these podcasts is to give us the opportunity to share information and thoughts with you and to inspire all of you who work at Bridgeway. As ever, we'd love to hear from you, so if you've got any feedback, please get in touch.
Hi everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this very special edition of the Bridgeway podcast. In part 1, I was joined by Pino and Brian to talk about Bridgeway and how it all started, and I'm pleased to say they both agreed to continue this podcast journey with us. So we finished the last episode at the point where Brian had retired and Pino was running Bridgeway by himself. Pino, how did that feel?
It was big shoes to fill, quite lonely to be honest.
Yeah.
A bit like 1995 all over again, in that Andy had gone and Brian had retired quite rightly after a solid innings in terms of work he'd done for British Rail and in the private sector at Bridgeway. But it was excitement and a bit of fear, I guess, mixed together. I think the biggest thing was that Brian retired on the 23rd, on St. George's Day, 23rd of April 2007.
Yeah. And
I remember going on a holiday with my family to Italy and ringing Mike up and asking how things were in the summer. And everything, just checking in on the business, and also asking him what was happening. Was there anything in the news? It was pre the days of having news feeds on a smartphone. Smartphones didn't exist in 2007. And Mike just happens to mention casually that there's some conversation going off in America around subprime mortgages. God knows what that meant at the time, but that was a starting point of the global financial crisis. Yeah. So the early stages were pretty rocky, really, because just after Brian had retired, the whole global financial crisis thing kicked off, and you'd got people queuing up outside Northern Rock wanting to withdraw their savings, and Lehman Brothers going bust in 2008, and lots of other economic.
Did you ever feel like you didn't want to continue, or? You were looking at other options or anything like that?
No, I never. I felt the burden of responsibility. Yeah. Because Brian, the three of us had created the business. Brian and I had sort of built a really solid foundation and platform, and then Brian retires, and all of a sudden the economic world starts to wobble all over the place, and there. By 2010, Brian had got his last tranche payment from the business, and then in the April on St. George's Day 2010, 23rd of April, and then there's an election. I go on a business trip to Australia for a week, and the election outcome when we wake up in Sydney with Steve and I were in Sydney, was that there'd been a hung parliament, and then there was a coalition government formed, and then a comprehensive spending review. So 2010 was just a nightmare. It felt a lot like what CP7 feels like right now, where you just got a lot of economic stuff happening in the background, and the railways were needing to prove their worth, or investment needed to be backed up. So it was rocky. It was tough.
Did you doubt yourself?
Yeah, but I couldn't show it.
Do you still doubt yourself?
And I'll always double check. And you said about me running the business on my own. I've never run the business on my own. I'd got a really good leadership team. And I remember at one point me speaking to Brian. I don't know whether Brian remembers, but I called him one Saturday morning to sort of share what my worries were. And I remember Brian's advice was, you need to speak to your team. Yeah. You need to share with them what you're concerned about. Yeah. And I'm not sure I ever did quite that clearly. Probably didn't. Lisa's shaking her head. But it was, it was quite tough. It was hard. It wasn't clear how things were going to go, but it became a point about sticking to core principles of making sure that from a client point of view, we're delivering everything we need to deliver, working safely. We're always keeping it back to basic principles of, trying to be as efficient as we could, and just roll with the punches, really. But it wasn't easy.
And we had on the first podcast, I asked about Carolyn and Ina and how they felt about you setting up the business. What did Carolyn think about this sort of stage where it was just
You know what? She was. I think she was. She backed my thoughts on it. You know, I mean, I decided to stay with it. Brian deserved everything that he got. You know, he needed to, you know, Brian deserved to retire, deserved to have that time, and Carolyn backed me. But it wasn't the easiest of thing. But you know, Carolyn's always been there for me, so she was just a rock.
Yeah.
And you know, it's that old saying, behind every successful man is a surprised woman. But you know, she was solid.
Yeah. So, Brian, did you ever look back? Did you ever, or was it all the right time? I know you continue to do some work at Bridgeway, but did you ever think, oh, you know?
No, it was the right time.
It was the right
and I was
time.
glad I made the decision. Yeah. I didn't mind coming back and doing the engineering work. I enjoyed doing that. But, and there were other things going on in my life that it was probably a good thing that I had retired.
Yeah.
My youngest son wasn't well, and so the fact that I'd retired meant I could see him every day and things like that.
Yeah.
So that sort of made a difference. If I'd have just cast off from the business and done nothing, I'd have sat there thinking I wanted to be back. Yeah. But because I was doing some work and lots of other things, then yes, it was the right time for me to go. And I'm glad we did it the way we did, because at the time that I was thinking of leaving, we looked at different options, and we were bombarded with people who wanted to buy the company and promise us all sorts of things. And we soon realised that any move in that direction would be entirely against the principles we'd set the company up for.
And in timing terms, when you look at the global financial crisis, it would have been a disaster.
The wrong time.
It would,
but we could never have known that. Brian's timing was perfect. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You know. But it was. What about Ina? What was Ina's view of you?
What, when I retired? Yeah, I think she was ready for me to retire and so forth as well. Because years before, well, about that time, but referring back to years before, going back before Bridgeway, but also during the Bridgeway period, she said to me once, you know, I hated Sundays. I said, why? She said, because when the kids were growing up, all my friends were out with their children, and you were always either at work or asleep because you'd been on Saturday night. And that continued into Bridgeway to some extent. There was something on a weekend night. If we weren't doing it, we were doing, like Pino said, worrying about it. So, she was ready.
I mean, I don't know whether you remember, Bryn, but Brian and I had a fax machine in their kitchen. Yeah. And, you know, during the middle of the night, all of a sudden the phone would ring, and then they'd get this squealing noise. Yeah. And there was 20-page fax working. And, Brian's garage was initially the diving store. Yeah. You know, with all the diving cylinders and dry suits and wetsuits and all that stuff, but
so it's the right time for you. And when did you start writing your book, Brian? Was that?
Oh, that's only
more recent.
3 years ago now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, did it over post-COVID, and just did it over the next 2 winters. Yeah. When I couldn't get out on the bike. Yeah. So,
But I remember you mentioning about your memoirs a long time ago, and
well, probably,
and it was one of those where, you know, for me it felt a bit like Brian saying, I've applied for my redundancy, and my first reaction was, you've got no chance. And when he said to me, I'm going to write a book one day, my first reaction was, he won't do that. But then I thought, I know, it's Brian Maddison. He will write his book, because that's the guy he is, and you did. I thought, come on, Pino, you should know by now how this works.
What do you think when you look at Bridgeway now, Brian?
Let me say first, when I retired, I always knew that Pino would carry on with that success. Yeah. But I didn't expect it to grow to the extent it has. So I'm proud because I was part of starting it, and I'm so pleased that it has continued to grow and be successful. Yeah. Yeah. And I look in that yard sometimes and see the number of vehicles you've got, and I see there's a great big lorry there today with Bridgeway and and I'm thinking, they've got far too many vehicles. They don't need that many. But no, I'm really pleased. Yeah.
Pino, what do you think?
I never envisioned myself running an engineering company. I didn't see that, and I didn't ever plan on it, Bridgeway being as big as it is. but I've always been of the view that we take opportunities where they exist and we grow the business if we're providing that value for the clients and that people are getting something out of it. So, it was it's been an exciting journey. Really, it's been good to be able to get this far, and the future's promising, but not without its risks. But you can't build tall buildings without good foundations, and Brian was in the trenches putting those foundations in. Really important aspect of Bridgeway, and I think Andy Jones and I would have struggled without Brian's input. So the legacy's there.
So we've grown so much over 30 years. We were celebrating Nigel Stockdale's retirement last week, and we were talking about how many people that we've employed over that 30 years. And I think we thought there was around 6,000 in total, something like that. We always say it's people that make Bridgeway the place it is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, massively so.
Well, absolutely. It's the people that make it, but also it's the Bridgeway way to make the people as well, to make sure they're properly trained and supported and everything else. So I think the two go together. I think the company makes the people and the people make the company.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So when you look back, would you have done anything differently?
Not a huge amount. I could name a couple of individual instances, times in my career that I would have done it differently, but they're few and far between. Yeah. Overall, I don't think so.
I think I'd have probably been a bit calmer around stuff. I think Carolyn has had to sort of live with my sort of emotional. I struggle not to wear my heart on my sleeve. So I think Carolyn's been there and had to feel that emotional roller coaster, and my kids have as well. And I've learnt a lot about people over the years and about what makes things work. So there's aspects about approach that would be a little bit different. But
had you have known that at the start?
Had I known that at the start, and I think in some instances we probably grab hold of opportunities a bit with a bit, with more zest, I guess, or more belief. But possibly, but not massively so.
We coped. I think we coped very well with some of the things that the industry threw at us. If you remember, we were doing possession management on our own patch up this way, and all of a sudden they said, "Oh, you're not as bluntly as that, but you're not going to do that anymore. You've got to go down and work from Bristol and in South Wales, places we never even heard of." And we coped with that, and it proved good for us.
Yeah, that was the thing of us being seen as a dynamic, can-do business. And the problem with that was that we were being stuff that we set up and had running really well got taken off us and handed to someone else. But then we got given a really tough challenges. But you always put your best people on the hardest work. And so there was that. But we've always had that view of, you know what, if it was that easy, everybody would do it. And actually, absolutely, if someone's asking you to do some tough stuff, then take it as a compliment. And we like a challenge, didn't we? We've always liked a challenge, always been up for self-reflection and changing what we do.
What advice would you give to your younger selves?
I'd be saying do more hip work, more physio work around my hips, because they'd probably I wouldn't have worn them out as quickly. But some of that's genetic. I mean, from a life and business perspective, I don't have loads of regrets. I've enjoyed getting stuck in.
No, I wouldn't. There's so little I would change. I'd just say, trust in your own judgment and go with it. I wouldn't.
I've enjoyed getting...
I would have changed what I was like at 15 and the 2 or 3 wasted years before I came into the railway. I could change that quite easily. But other than that, no.
For me, I've enjoyed the idea of a bunch of guys. There was 3 of us in the early stages, and then it grew, and we always had that passion and drive of getting decide what you're trying to do, decide what your challenges, work out what your challenges are, and then problem solve as a team, and then get your shoulder behind it.
Yeah.
And make it happen. And then if this thing of actually things aren't working, just review it again and tweak it and just keep going forward. It's always been good. And that energy that I felt from the business. I remember there were times when Andy, Brian and I'd be sat with a particular problem or a number of issues had come in, and I remember on occasions I'd be there going, what are we going to deal with this? And Andy'd be similar, and Brian saying, leave that to me. And it was just, just thinking, the power of diversity within a team. And then other occasions where things would be getting really heated and confrontational, and Brian and Andy would be going, how are we going to do this? And I'd be like, no, I'll do that. I love this stuff.
That happened. Yeah.
And it happened a lot, didn't it? And, and Andy would be around, Andy could be two ends of the country in the same 10-hour or 12-hour shift, and he'd just soak it up. But we all had a different skill sets, and I think we've that diversity that was Bridgeway as the three of us has just grown within the business, and it works every day. It's just on a bigger scale.
So, Pino, the business has grown. The number of people that we employ has increased. Head office has evolved. We've moved 3 times now, 4 if you count, obviously, working from Brian's. And we've introduced a new vision this year. What does the next? What does the future hold for Bridgeway? What's next?
I think carrying on with the good stuff that we do, but I'm excited and really keen to see how AI technology impacts the next 10, 20 years of the rail industry, because I think it's going to play a big part in business, in life. So how AI and machine learning and technology grows into the rail sector, albeit it can't come into it too quickly because of the safety critical nature of what the industry is. But you're seeing those sort of changes come through. In growth terms, I think we should I'm always excited to be able to deliver a quality product to a client and problem solve and give people value. And if that opportunity is there, then my view is that we should take it. Yeah. But exceeding expectations everywhere, safely, socially, and sustainably are always at the core of making those decisions. And you can go into loads of complicated manuals and lots of descriptions of how we should do stuff, but that you working off exceeding expectations safely, socially, and sustainably as a core underpinning test on everything we do, for me, just carries on working. It's the way Bridgeway, the way we've always been, the yin and yang of how we set up stuff. Brainstorming in 2000, wasn't it, when we were sat in the boardroom at Oban House and came up with those sorts of concepts. Alongside Andy Rolls and Andy Jones. That stuff still underpins everything we do. And the future's really promising, but it won't be without change and it won't be without challenge, because that's the world we're in.
Yeah. So before we finish, is there anything that you'd like to say or a message you'd like to share? Brian, want to go first?
I'll just wish all of you all the best for the next however many years, let's say 30 years, and say, repeat really how immensely proud I am to have been part of the setting up of Bridgeway and the first 12 years or so that I was here, and the way that it's going in the future. And all the best to everybody even those people that are coming here and never seen before, and all of them. Wish them all the best.
Thanks, Brian. Pino?
While Brian's in the room, just thank Brian for believing in me, despite the fact that he was being pestered by my brother. Giving an 18-year-old unskilled labourer an opportunity of a job that then turns into the opportunity to go to further education and become a category 4 advanced craft bricklayer, and then go on to do an ONC and an HNC, and just that ability to just be in an environment where if someone was good enough and were willing to work hard enough, they'd be given the opportunity. And Brian did that. And also from a point of view of establishing Bridgeway, Brian's contribution, his effort and skill at creating the foundation that Bridgeway's built on was got to be recognised. Yeah, and he's still capable. So despite the fact he's retired, he gave me a side eye look there because you're going to what's he got in mind. But I
felt the pressure of him in the room earlier.
Yeah. So thank Brian and I know as well, because Bridgeway was was then and always has been a family. So it was Tim. I mean, one of the great moments for me, because Tim took on Tim's son. Tim Maddison took on a role as a commercial director within the business. But one of the tipping points, and I remember Brian complaining, one of the things you said about what did Brian complain about, was one day when Brian told me that Tim had pulled him up for being too generous on a commercial point. And he said, bloody hell, you're just like Pino. and I started thinking, hang on a minute, complaining that his son has just done something to him that probably sounded like me, too much like me. And that was a great point. Thanking all the staff, all the people, the 6,000 or so people who I think have, the ones that are still at Bridgeway, and I say Nigel retired last week with 28 years service. We've got lots of people on, 20 plus years service within the business. But then there's some people that only stay 2-3 years. But I still feel that there's a lot of those guys have taken value from Bridgeway's ethos and work ethic and drive, and have actually applied it in their own careers. And I think the rail industry, Brian, is better for what we've contributed, whether it's people who work in the company right now, or the ones that have worked in the business but then gone on to do bigger and better things in different organisations, and then the future in a cohort that will join. It's exciting. I mean, for me, I'm surrounded by a great leadership team. 2007, 2010 wouldn't have worked without people like you, Lisa, and Mike Harris and Richard Cooper and all those great names that are Steve Dixon that are in the business. It wouldn't have come along. So it's not a one-man show by any stretch. You know that. I'm straightening out regularly.
I know that.
And finally, just thank you to all the families, because Brian made the point earlier that I didn't see a lot of him during his railway career at the weekends, and his kids didn't. People give up that kind of time for the railway industry all the time. And I think what Bridgeway does and what the railway does for the UK economy is really valuable. And it can't work. The railways can't work without people being committed to giving up that time when passengers are not using the railway. That's when we're working. So thanking the families for supporting their relatives' work. It's really important, Brian, isn't it?
It is.
And I'll give a plug to Brian's book. If you haven't read Brian's book,
read it.
Oh, thanks,
read it, because it's a real window on what the world looked like in British rail days. And there was some interesting stories. So just a quick plug for Brian's book.
Okay.
And the sales go towards
the Railway Children Charity.
Railway Children Charity,
I think we'll leave it there then. So thank you so much to both of you for sharing your journey with us. I'm sure I'll speak for many of our employees when I say that, thank you for creating an environment where we've been able to fulfil our career ambitions and providing us with opportunities. I know you said it's not just a one-man show now, and, there's a team behind it, but there's obviously needed to be 3 of you that started it in the first place, so thank you for that. I look forward to continuing our 30th anniversary celebrations this year. And thank you both. Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.